Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into sandals and stepping softly across the ancient rooftops of Persia. The sky above is a deep velvet blue, scattered with stars so dense they seem poured on like spilled sugar. You're in a city that hums with heat long after sunset, a place where the air itself feels baked, and the stone beneath your feet glows warm even in the dark. You're moving slowly because there's no rush here, just a warm night and the distant clatter of clay jugs and murmuring voices rising up from below. Somewhere, a lute plucks a slow melody. The scent of dust, rosewater, and something faintly burnt lingers on the breeze. And yes, you are absolutely sweating through your linen tunic. Because it's Persia, it's the middle of summer, and spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive this for long without some tricks. The sun here isn't just hot, it's personal. But the Persians didn't just complain, they invented answers. Tonight we're following a surprisingly delicious one. Somehow, in a world with no freezers, no fridges, and no energy-efficient cooling modes, they found a way to chill their desserts. Real, honest-to Zoroaster ice cream. In the desert, in 500 BCE. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these sleepy little stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pass beneath an archway, feel the faintest exhale of cool air, and descend into a courtyard shaded by grapevines, where tonight's story truly begins. Imagine this. You're a merchant, home from a long, dusty journey along the royal road. Your donkeys are still sulking in the corner after a week of hauling ceramic jars full of saffron, and your sandals are now mostly a suggestion of footwear. But in your hands is a gift for your mother-in-law that might actually keep her quiet for 5 minutes. A bowl of something cold, sweet, mysterious. This is not your average bowl of anything. It is the closest thing to ancient Persian ice cream. And it didn't come from a cave, a snowbank, or a sorcerer. It came from architecture. From science, from the incredible stubbornness of people who just really wanted dessert. You've probably heard that ancient Egypt built pyramids and ancient Greece built philosophy. Well, Persia built the yakshal, literally a ice pit. These things look like giant beehives that crash-landed in the middle of a sandstorm. Tall domes up to 60 feet high, made of special heat-resistant mud bricks, with thick, sloped walls and air vents that whispered wind across blocks of harvested ice. And yes, they harvested ice, not by trekking up a mountain or shipping it from far-off peaks, though they sometimes did that too, but by freezing water right there in the desert. Here's how. They dig shallow pools next to these yakchals, wait for the frigid desert night to do its magic, and scrape the ice into layers inside the dome come morning. Then, seal the place up tighter than a teenager's diary. But before we get to the big dome and its frosty interior, let's pause on something even more basic. Because before you can store ice, you need to make it. And that's not something deserts are famous for. By day, Persian summers regularly slap the mercury past 40 degrees C or 104 degrees C if you're one of those why is water boiling at the wrong temperature types. But at night, the dry air, cloudless skies, and wide open landscape created what scientists call radiative cooling. Basically, the ground bleeds heat straight into the void. The result, those shallow pools could freeze overnight even when the daytime heat would have melted your face off. No magic, just physics, patience, and some serious optimism. Now it wasn't guaranteed. Historians still argue whether this method was used purely for food or for ceremonial purposes, or even religious rituals tied to Zoroastrian beliefs about purity and elements. But the frozen evidence is hard to ignore. Quite literally in the form of centuries-old yakachals still standing in cities like Yazd, stubbornly refusing to melt into history. Imagine wandering past one at dawn. The ground crunches underfoot with the last whisper of night frost. You lean close to a sun-baked dome, place your hand on the surface and feel nothing. Coolness. Stillness. A little goosebump of wonder. Because somewhere inside that massive mud bubble is actual usable ice. In Persia, in summer. You might think, okay, maybe this was just for kings or ceremonies. But not quite. Wealthier families use yakchal ice for everything from food prep to keeping sick relatives cool. Some cities pooled resources to share public yakchals, like a kind of frozen library. Except instead of late fees, you just risked your neighbors talking trash about your grape syrup game. Oh, and don't picture this happening in silence. Cities like ancient Ray or Susa were alive with sound. The clank of pottery, shouts of water cellars, the distant clang of bronze doors, and, of course, the hiss of boiling syrup being reduced over open flame to pour over that precious ice. It wasn't just function, it was flair. There are scattered references, some historical, some suspiciously poetic, that suggest Persians served elaborate ice dishes on golden trays, garnished with mint, rose petals, or even crushed almonds. Because if you've figured out how to make ice cream in the desert, why not make it fabulous? And you, our sleepwalking time traveler, have just had your first taste of it. You lick the sweet syrup from your lips, savor the chill lingering on your tongue, and smile. The night is still young, but the coolness has begun. The sun is barely creeping over the horizon now, stretching its golden fingers across the courtyard tiles as you rise with a satisfied sigh. That icy dessert from last night? A memory clinging sweetly to your tongue, like a whisper of rosewater and snow. But as the morning warms, you're left with a new question humming in the back of your mind. How did an entire civilization organize its life around keeping things cold in a place that tried very hard not to be? Because here's the thing, there was no Persian word for freezer, no energy-efficient appliance of the year badge, no crisper drawer. What they did have was an intimate, borderline poetic relationship with physics, patience, and the elements. And clay, a whole lot of clay. Imagine trying to explain modern refrigeration to a 5th century BCE Persian brickmaker. He'd probably nod slowly, hand you a trowel, and say, "That's nice. But have you tried adobe with goat hair?" Because while you're out here messing with your thermostat, these folks were using walls 4 feet thick, insulated with everything from straw to ash, to keep ice from melting for months. Yes, months. Some yakchals stored winter ice into the blazing heart of summer. This wasn't just a trick. It was infrastructure. An entire building designed to do exactly one job, keep cold stuff cold. And it worked. Now, the Persians didn't just build these domes and call it a day. Around them, they sculpted a kind of cooling ecosystem. Long, sloped walls called shabastans shaded the shallow ice pools at night, blocking wind and absorbing minimal daytime heat. Some even had underground channels called qanats that carried water from mountain springs far away, flowing gently beneath the surface to avoid evaporation. That's right, underground aqueducts, centuries before Rome made it fashionable. And these weren't little irrigation ditches. Qanats could stretch for miles beneath the desert, linking communities to distant snow-fed mountains. The water whispered through gravel and clay, guided by gravity and precision, finally emerging cool and clear inside homes, bathhouses, and, you guessed it, ice pits. The system was so efficient, you'd think someone with an engineering degree drew it all up on a whiteboard. But nope, just years of observation, trial, and the occasional mud collapse. Add a sprinkle of generational memory, and voila. Your city now has a built-in air conditioner, courtesy of the Earth itself. Modern scientists still marvel at how these techniques work so well, so long ago. Historians still argue whether yakshals were originally a Zoroastrian invention or borrowed from earlier Median or Elamite practices. But one thing's clear, they weren't messing around when it came to staying cool. Let's just zoom out for a second. You're standing in a neighborhood in what we now call Iran, maybe ancient Kerman or Kashan. Mud brick homes huddle together like sun-baked loaves. Narrow alleyways bend like lazy streams, designed to channel wind and minimize heat. Courtyards bloom with fig trees and shade, and somewhere nearby a yakchal hums its silent, icy purpose. Now imagine being the neighborhood kid assigned to run and fetch a tray of ice for an afternoon treat. You bolt through the alleys, clay jug in hand, nearly wipe out trying to dodge a sleepy goat, and finally arrive at the entrance of the ice dome. The door creaks open, not wide, just enough to let in a sliver of early light, and you're hit with a wave of blessed, blessed cold. Inside it's quiet, still. The thick walls mute the outside world to a muffled hum. Ice blocks stacked like sleepy sentinels glint faintly in the dark, nestled under straw or burlap. You chip off what you need, tuck it in a cloth, and start the return dash, pausing only to sneak a bite of frost because, well, you're 10 and nobody's watching. And while that kid is off licking stolen ice, let's pause on the materials. The walls of the Yakchal weren't made of just any old mud. They used something called saruj, a magical mortar made from sand, clay, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash. If that sounds like the start of a witch's soup, you're not far off. It was waterproof, heat-resistant, and reportedly tough enough to survive centuries of blazing sun and chilling nights. Some modern engineers have tried replicating it, but the results vary. It's like trying to bake your grandma's famous pie using just her cryptic notes and a suspicious number of dashes. Still, the structures endure. A few yakshals still stand today, their domes pockmarked but proud, like desert tortoises frozen in time. And these weren't isolated oddities. By the time of the Achaemenid Empire, the one with Cyrus the Great, Darius, and a suspicious fondness for gold jewelry, ice was a symbol. A way of saying, yes, I live in a furnace, but I drink cold milk, peasant. Royal feasts often featured chilled dishes, not just for taste but for status. When Darius hosted visiting nobles or governors, he didn't just show off his palace. He served ice. Which brings us to a little-known detail from one of the Persepolis tablets, those baked clay receipts of ancient bureaucracy that hints at workers being paid in ice during harvest festivals. Historians still argue whether that was literal or symbolic, but either way, it's delightfully absurd. Imagine collecting your paycheck and it's a popsicle, probably a little more satisfying than direct deposit. Of course, not everyone had access to a fancy dome. Rural folk in smaller villages often relied on shaded wells or caves. Some even wrapped food in soaked cloth and buried it in sand to create a makeshift evaporative fridge. It worked, kind of, but you had to really want that cold melon. And through all this innovation ran a single thread, the belief that comfort and elegance weren't just for the rich, they were for the clever. The Persians didn't wait for the weather to be kind. They made kindness out of climate. So now, as the day brightens and a soft golden haze bathes the streets, you curl up in the shaded corner of a mud brick courtyard, listening to a pigeon coo somewhere above. Your hands are still sticky from breakfast, a pastry filled with dates and a touch of sesame, and your lips cool from the last sliver of stored ice. The heat will come, as it always does. But for now, there's a moment of stillness, thanks to a world that once figured out how to chill ice cream in the desert. You wake sometime in the afternoon to the sound of distant clinking, clay bowls maybe, and someone whistling a song that's probably older than any empire. The sun, determined as ever, has taken its spot directly above the rooftops now, baking the city in a gentle, relentless glow. It's too hot to run, too bright to work, and frankly too dry to have strong opinions about anything. So you do what everyone does. You find the shade, and you sit, slowly. It's here under a fig tree with dust on your sandals and sleep in your eyes that someone finally tells you about the Yakchal. Not as architecture, but as myth. Because to the people living in its shadow, that great dome of cold wasn't just a building. It was a little bit magic, a miracle of mud. You rise and wander through the streets of an old quarter in Kerman. Narrow and sloping, the mud walls rippling like dunes frozen mid-wave. And then, there it is, the Yakchal. It stands at the end of a side street like some half-forgotten spaceship, ancient and massive, shaped like a conical beehive made by giants with heat stroke. It's older than anything around it. Local kids probably think it's haunted, and in some ways they're not wrong. This dome is hollow. Inside it hides a sunken pit where ice was stored during winter months, packed in layers of straw to insulate it until the cruelest part of summer. The entire shape, this alien-looking curve, was chosen to reduce surface area and minimize sun exposure. It wasn't just design, it was defense. You slip through its small, stooped entrance. The air changes almost instantly. It's still hot outside, but in here, the silence is thick and cool. A single shaft of light cuts down from a small vent above, illuminating dust particles dancing in lazy spirals like they, too, are taking a nap. This is where the real work of chilling the desert began. So, how did these buildings come to be? Historians still argue whether the oldest yakchals originated during the Achaemenid period, around 500 BCE, or earlier still. Some even speculate influences from Babylonian ice storage techniques or early Elamite cooling pits. But what's certain is that by the time of Darius and Xerxes, the use of yakchals was widespread in Persian urban centers. And they weren't hidden away. They were built proudly like public statements. "Look at us," they said, "defying the sun, one snowball at a time." Let's talk construction. First came the foundation, a deep cylindrical pit dug into the earth, lined with clay and gravel for drainage. Over that, thick walls were built using sarouge, that hardy composite we met earlier. Clay, lime, ash, goat hair, and egg whites. The mixture was surprisingly sophisticated, forming a barrier nearly waterproof and impressively heat-resistant. Honestly, if it weren't for the goat hair, modern builders might still use it. Then came the dome, always with a small opening at the top, not just for ventilation, but to allow warm air to escape while cool air settled low. It's the same principle that makes your basement the most bearable room in July. But the most impressive part? These domes were built without internal supports. No scaffolding, just layer upon layer of brick, carefully angled inward, each course locked into the next by weight and friction alone. It's an engineering trick that somehow balances math with meditation. One misplaced brick and, well, let's just say nobody wanted to be known as that guy who cracked the ice dome. Now here's a fun detail. Some yakshals had underground tunnels, secretive and narrow, that connected them to nearby qanats. These weren't just passive aqueducts. During cold winter nights, water from the qanats could be directed into shallow surface channels next to the dome, where it would freeze. Workers wrapped in thick cloaks and probably questioning their career choices would rise before dawn to collect the fresh ice and shovel it into the pit, layer by layer, week after week. You've got to admire the commitment. This was not a two-step recipe. You didn't just add water and freeze. You braved the cold nights, planned for months, battled evaporation, and hauled ice with your bare hands. And then you stored it in a glorified mud cone that somehow actually worked. One Persian chronicler noted that a yakshal, properly maintained, could preserve ice from winter through the end of summer. That's over 6 months of chill in a place where the sun routinely tries to boil your sandals off. And they did it without wires, without fans, just cleverness and physics. Now, not every yakchal was identical. Some were small, village-scale, modest affairs with just enough room for a few families to share. Others, like the grand domes of Yazd or Sirjan, were built by city officials and could store several tons of ice at once. These were public marvels, symbols of civic pride, like a town having the biggest bell tower or the least embarrassing moat. And people didn't just store ice. These domes were often used to chill food, store dairy, and even preserve delicate items like rosewater or medicinal pastes that spoiled easily in the heat. You might even find dried fruits hanging in the cooler corners, waiting for a royal picnic or a particularly bougie wedding. But let's not romanticize it too much. The work was hard. Ice making wasn't glamorous. The workers, sometimes enslaved, sometimes paid laborers, endured long nights and back-breaking hauling. The pits had to be kept clean, the straw replaced regularly, the entrances sealed against curious animals and even more curious neighbors. Still, it was work with purpose. The idea that, in the harshest months, your family could taste cold melon or drink milk that hadn't curdled, that was worth it. And sometimes, on special occasions, holidays, festivals, weddings, that ice was turned into something more. A bowl of sharbat, perhaps, fruit juice mixed with snow or ice and a generous splash of grape syrup, or a sweet cream and saffron concoction poured over chipped ice and served with pomegranate seeds. Maybe even a dessert scented with orange blossom and chilled just enough to make you close your eyes and forget that your shirt is sticking to your spine. You take a slow breath, standing inside the yakchal. The air feels ancient, like it remembers the hands that shaped it. You run your fingers along the inner wall, cool to the touch even now. A quiet echo greets you, a soft thrum of silence that settles into your bones. And for a moment, you're not just in a building. You're inside a solution, a structure built not to conquer nature, but to understand it, to work with it, to bend the desert ever so slightly toward comfort. Outside, the heat presses against the dome, as stubborn as ever. But inside, there is stillness. Stillness and the memory of ice. You emerge from the Yakshal just as the sun begins its long, downward slide across the sky. The heat outside is still considerable, like stepping into a bread oven that forgot its purpose. But there's something about having been inside that dome that makes you feel just a little smug, like you've been let in on a secret the desert has been trying to hide for millennia. So, you head back through the twisting streets, down toward the edge of the city, where fields shimmer with dry heat and the ground begins to give way to open desert. Here's where the real mystery begins, because it turns out ice wasn't just stored in ancient Persia. In many places, it was actually made, from scratch, on purpose, in the desert, without electricity. Let that sink in for a second. The same place where you could cook a flatbread on a stone in mid-July also produced ice, through nothing more than patience, physics, and a stubborn refusal to accept the laws of thermodynamics. You stroll out past a crumbling mud wall, and ahead you see a wide, flat surface, almost like a shallow basin carved into the earth. These were the freezing pools, or barfsas, which, ironically, has nothing to do with throwing up, and everything to do with throwing shade at modern air conditioners. They were typically long, narrow rectangles, often aligned east to west, so that during the day, the tall walls on either side could block as much sunlight as possible. At night, when the desert's dry air allowed heat to escape rapidly into the clear sky, a thin layer of water would be poured into the pool. Then the magic began. As the surface cooled, it radiated its heat upward into space. The temperature dropped fast, sometimes well below freezing, and a delicate skin of ice would form, shimmering faintly under the stars like the world's slowest miracle. Now you might be thinking, isn't that just luck? Surely it's too inconsistent to rely on for actual ice production? But remember, the Persians weren't just playing the odds. They were working with them. By digging their pools shallow, just a few inches deep, they increased the surface area exposed to the cold air, allowing heat to escape more efficiently. They also built low, mud brick walls around the perimeter, further protecting the water from warm breezes or daytime heat spillover. The result? A surprisingly steady yield of thin ice every night during the winter months. And each morning, a team of workers would rise before the sun and begin harvesting. They'd skim the fragile ice from the surface, layer it in straw or sawdust, and cart it, carefully, reverently, back to the Yakchal. Over the course of weeks, layer by careful layer, a mound of ice would grow in the cool belly of the dome, each piece a fragile gift from the stars. Historians still argue whether this method was originally Persian, or if it evolved in parallel with techniques in other arid regions, like parts of North Africa or even northern India. But the scale and consistency with which it was used in Persia is unmatched. Some cities had entire neighborhoods built around the ice trade. It wasn't a novelty, it was infrastructure. And while we're here, let's meet one of the heroes of this frosty tale, the ice harvester. No official title survives in English, but you can picture them, the ones who rose long before dawn, wrapped in scratchy cloaks, walking out across the frost-covered desert like sleepy, desert-bound Santas. Their job wasn't easy. That delicate ice had to be collected with care, packed fast and transported without cracking or melting under the rising sun. No pressure. In larger cities like Yazd, these workers sometimes formed guilds, with knowledge passed down through families. Fathers taught sons, and sometimes daughters, though they rarely made the records, how to read the sky, feel the wind, judge the thickness of a forming sheet of ice by ear. Not by science class, by intuition. And what a strange image. A freezing dawn in Persia, the stars fading above, and figures stooped over a shallow pond, gently coaxing ice from water like pulling dreams from sleep. You're probably wondering, why not just carry ice down from the mountains? After all, Persia had snow-capped peaks, didn't it? Yes, and they did that too. In some areas, ice was collected from higher elevations during winter and brought down to the cities, wrapped in insulating materials like straw or charcoal ash. These ice caravan trips were treacherous, slow, and ridiculously expensive. A single block of mountain snow might travel for days by mule, slowly weeping into its wrapping like a homesick traveler. So why bother when you could build your own ice farm right next door? The genius of the Persian method was that it democratized ice. No longer just a royal indulgence carted down from the mountaintops, it became something a city could cultivate on its own. Local, sustainable, proudly stubborn. One of the quirkiest details? Some sources suggest that ice stored this way, layered in straw, packed low into the yakchal, developed a slightly earthy flavor. Nothing dramatic, just a hint of desert woven into the cold, like sipping winter with a whisper of dust. Today, if you visit some of these old yakachal sites, you might find small gardens nearby, often planted in the runoff zones where melted ice once soaked the soil. Date palms, fig trees, and grapevines that thrive thanks to just a little borrowed coolness. It's poetic in a way. The ice that cooled royal wine also watered someone's orchard. And for every massive city dome, there were countless little home-scale versions. Cellars dug beneath houses, lined with bricks and filled with straw-packed snow, used to keep milk from curdling or fruit from spoiling. Because once you've tasted cold melon in July, well, there's really no going back. As the light softens into evening, you walk once more past one of these frozen ponds, now dry and cracked, the bottom etched with centuries of sun. But you imagine it alive, filled with still water, starlight above, and the soft crackle of ice forming in the silence. Not from electricity, not from magic, but from patience, from watching the sky, from knowing how to work with the desert instead of against it. You pause there a moment, squinting at the line of domes beyond the horizon, and think to yourself, maybe there's more than one way to make summer a little sweeter. You've now seen how the Persians built the yakshal, how they conjured ice under the stars, and how laborers turned puddles into stockpiles. But as you wander into the cooler hours of evening, the story begins to shift. Because in Persia, ice wasn't just about comfort. It was a kind of power, an expression of prestige, of devotion, of slightly smug innovation. Picture yourself seated at a long, low table inside a shaded pavilion. You're one of the lucky guests at a high summer feast thrown by a local satrap, maybe in Ecbatana or Susa, one of the opulent cities of the Achaemenid Empire. Long before refrigerators or electric fans, there's already a bowl in front of you, sweating gently in the heat. Inside, a treat so rare, so startlingly cold, that your eyebrows rise the moment your fingers brush its rim. This isn't just a dessert, it's a statement. Here in the royal courts of ancient Persia, ice became a currency of status. To serve something cold, not tepid, not merely cool, but truly cold, was like lighting your cigar with a lightning bolt. You weren't just wealthy, you were powerful enough to humble the sun. And make no mistake, the Persians had a flair for drama. The Achaemenid kings, especially Darius I, had a particular interest in out-engineering nature itself. They were builders, organizers, and showmen, fond of gold, grandeur, and garden parties where the grapes were chilled and the milk didn't curdle halfway through a poem recital. Historical sources are frustratingly poetic about these things. There's a lot of banquets of wonder and meals like moonlight, but fragments survive. One inscription from Persepolis mentions sweet snow water being poured for honored guests. Some scholars believe this referred to Faludi's earliest ancestor, a sort of sorbet made from snow and syrup laced with rosewater and melon seeds. Imagine the silence around the table as you take the first bite. Icy, fragrant, unexpectedly refreshing. Everyone pretends it's no big deal. But you all know someone just burned a lot of straw in the yakshal to make this happen. But it wasn't just about impressing nobles. In the Zoroastrian religion, the elements, earth, water, air, and fire, were considered sacred. Purity, particularly in the form of clean water and cooling breezes, carried spiritual weight. Some historians suggest that the act of preserving ice might have had religious undertones, like preserving the purity of water for ritual uses in the heat of summer. Of course, historians still argue whether ice held any liturgical role at all, or if it was just another luxurious side dish. Either way, you didn't serve ice to someone you didn't respect. You didn't just plop a handful of snow into a bowl and hand it to a guy who'd insulted your beard. And cold wasn't just served, it was celebrated. Summer festivals often coincided with the opening of the yakchal. When the first of the winter's ice was unveiled in spring or early summer, some cities threw feasts, paraded the chilled treats through markets, or sold flavored snow to children for a few copper coins. Ice Day, Persian style. Here's where it gets even more interesting. You see, in these public feasts, ice didn't just cool desserts, it cooled wine. And not just any wine, but Persian wines often infused with herbs, dates, or even powdered lotus root, all served at what ancient texts vaguely call snow perfect, which is either a technical term or the most delightful oxymoron ever uttered in a palace. Drinking cold wine in a desert banquet hall, surrounded by cedar beams and ivory screens, became a powerful memory, the kind that travelers wrote home about, or at least carved into the occasional cuneiform tablet with a satisfied sigh. And while most of the Persian population drank warm beverages from clay cups and shared fresh fruit in shaded alleys, the royal court cultivated something different, a taste for the chilled, the rare, the engineered luxury of frozen delight. Take sherbet, for instance. Today it's a sugary, often syrup-based drink still popular in Iran and other parts of the Middle East. But the word itself comes from the Arabic shariba, to drink, and its early versions often involved mixing fruit syrups with ice or snow, a luxury reserved for the rich and very, very hydrated. Some suggest that the Achaemenid kings might have had their own versions of early slushies, snow flavored with grape must, honey, or sour cherry concentrate. If that sounds suspiciously modern, that's because it is. Cold desserts didn't suddenly appear with the invention of freezers. They came from people staring into the sun and saying, "You know what would make this unbearable heat more tolerable? Dessert." And for a desert society, that was no small accomplishment. It required architects, diggers, ice harvesters, mule drivers, syrup makers, and more, all working in slow rhythm, season by season, to make sure that the king's plum slushy didn't turn into soup. And the kicker? They shared it. Royal leftovers, ice, syrups, even sweets, were sometimes passed down to temple attendants, market vendors, or entertainers. Not as charity exactly, but as a kind of cooling trickle-down. Because nothing says, "I respect your lute solo," like a bowl of saffron-scented snow. As twilight finally arrives and the sky begins its gentle fade into lavender, you pass a group of children squatting in a courtyard, sharing something in chipped clay bowls. You peer closer and smile. Ice chips mixed with mulberry syrup. Some things never change. They glance up at you, lips stained purple, eyes shining from the chill, and you suddenly understand. This isn't just about beating the heat. It's about delight, about turning discomfort into celebration, about inventing joy from dust and fire. So the next time your air conditioner hums softly in the background, spare a thought for those who built domes of mud and packed them with star-born ice, for the kings who chilled their wine, for the workers who rose before dawn, for the joy of cooling your tongue on a summer evening, and knowing, deep down, that someone, thousands of years ago, wanted the exact same thing. Twilight spills across the rooftops now, softening the harsh lines of the city and drawing out the perfume of warm stone, dried herbs, and a hint of last night's charcoal smoke. You walk through the lengthening shadows following the scent of bread cooling on windowsills, the chatter of people settling into the rhythm of night, and something else, something subtler, a breeze. It slips around the corner, gentle and dry, whispering along the alley walls, curling like a cat through open doors and courtyard trellises. It doesn't cool you exactly, not yet, but it promises to. And this, dear traveler, is no accident. Because tonight you meet one of Persia's cleverest inventions, not for storing cold, but for catching it. The Badgir, the wind catcher. You're in Yaz now, one of the oldest continually inhabited cities on Earth. And as you glance up, the skyline bristles with what looks like a forest of upside-down chimneys. Square towers, each with tall slits running down their sides. Some narrow, some wide, some ornate, others blocky. All of them designed to do one job, trap the wind. And they do it beautifully. The Bajir is an ancient Persian solution to an eternal problem: how to survive summer when the air itself is cooking. Without fans, without compressors, without even a single watt of electricity, these towers cool buildings using nothing but physics, air pressure, and really stubborn architecture. Here's how it works. Imagine one of those towers rising above your house. It's got 4, 6, or maybe even 8 open sides, depending on the local wind patterns. Inside, vertical shafts run from roof to basement, sometimes lined with channels of wet cloth or even trickling water. When a breeze flows in from outside, usually from the north, it enters one of those slits and is directed downward. That air rushes through the narrow shaft, gathers speed, and spills into the living spaces below. As it travels, it mixes with cooler air trapped underground and sometimes passes over water channels, picking up moisture and chill. The result, a dry, hot wind transformed into a sigh of relief. And when the wind isn't blowing, the Bajir switches teams. Warm air inside the house rises naturally, exits through the tower, and pulls in cooler air from shaded courtyards or subterranean reservoirs. It becomes a passive exhaust fan, moving heat out while drawing comfort in. It's architecture that breathes. Historians still argue whether Baghers were invented independently in Persia or adapted from Egyptian and Mesopotamian concepts. But nowhere were they refined quite like in Iran, where entire homes were designed around their presence. A well-built Bagher could drop interior temperatures by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, turning an oven into a sanctuary. And these towers weren't hidden. They were proudly visible, towering above neighborhoods like sleepy sentinels. Some were intricately decorated with tiles, inscriptions, or carvings. A few had dome tops, catching not just the wind, but moonlight. Because if you're going to outsmart the sun, why not do it with a little flair? You step into a traditional home now, one of the grand courtyard houses of Yazd. Mud-plastered walls rise around you, thick enough to muffle even the shrillest gossip. The Bagher looms above, its shaft whispering faintly. The air inside is different, still warm, but not oppressive. It's like standing in the shadow of a fig tree while someone waves a fan, subtle but distinct. Now look down. Below the floor, beneath your sandals, lies another wonder, the sardab, or basement chamber. Dug deep into the earth and often connected to a qanat, those underground water channels we met earlier, the sardab was where the magic really happened. It was the final stage of the wind's journey, the cool chamber where air and water conspired to create relief. Families would retreat here in the hottest hours. Children napped on stone benches, grandmothers stirred pots of yogurt soup, and merchants planned sales over cooled apricot juice. The air might not be crisp, but it was enough to stop the sweat. And in July, that was paradise. The connection between the Bagher and the Yakhchal wasn't just metaphorical, it was practical. Some of the larger ice domes had their own built-in wind catchers, designed to keep air circulating even on still nights. It kept the stored ice from sweating or spoiling. It kept things quiet, undisturbed, even somehow dignified. And not every wind catcher was stationary. In later centuries, the principle was adapted into tents, carriages, even royal pavilions. Portable structures with slitted walls and layered claws designed to mimic the effect of a fixed Bagher. Because once you've tasted a breeze in 45-degree heat, you start chasing it like a royal addiction. The science behind these towers has even drawn modern attention. In recent years, architects have begun studying them again, hoping to revive passive cooling in the age of climate anxiety. Some modern malls and airports in the Middle East now feature wind catchers in their design, not just for aesthetics, but because they work. Still, nothing compares to standing inside a 500-year-old courtyard as dust settles in, feeling that faint current glide past your face, and knowing it comes not from wires or gas, but from the sky itself, coaxed gently down through mud and time. You lean back on a bench carved from stone and datewood, sip a cup of something chilled, rose water maybe, or sour cherry syrup, and listen. Not to the sounds, but to the absence of them. No hum of machines, just a light rustle, the turn of a page, the clink of glass, the occasional squawk of a pigeon judging you from the rafters. Somewhere above, the Bagher exhales again. You think back to all the things we use today to stay cool, apps, thermostats, smart home systems, and marvel at how something built of brick, mud, and sky can do the same job, gently, quietly, elegantly. And as the stars begin to return, slow, deliberate, you imagine them caught in the same wind, drifting softly downward, one cool breath at a time. Night in the desert isn't silent, it's just quiet in a different key. As you wander past the now sleeping bazaar, with its heavy doors latched and tarps drawn over piles of spice and cloth, you hear the sounds that come alive only after sundown. The low hoot of an owl, The distant plink of a string instrument, a mother calling her son home in a voice that's all routine and no urgency. Somewhere a donkey sighs like it's been working since Cyrus was king. You follow the narrow stone path past quiet gardens and still fountains, making your way to a small building just beyond the city's edge. It doesn't look like much, low-slung, with thick walls and wooden shutters, but inside something extraordinary happened. Because this wasn't just where ice was made or stored, it's where it was transformed. Welcome to the kitchen. Not just any kitchen. This is the domain of the royal cooks, the syrup makers, the early dessert artisans of ancient Persia, and tonight you'll stand beside them as they craft the ancestor of what we might call ice cream, or at least something suspiciously close. The air smells of cardamom and toasted nuts. Someone is simmering a pot of milk with strands of saffron that glow like summer lightning. Another is crushing pistachios with a stone mortar, rhythmically, meditatively. And on the far side of the room, next to a bowl packed with straw and shards of ice, a woman stirs a thick mixture of sweet cream. She doesn't call it ice cream. No one here does. But what they're making is something ancient, cold, and utterly delicious. Historians still argue whether the Persians invented ice cream or whether similar versions existed in ancient China or along the Silk Roads. What we know is this. Long before Italian gelato or American soft serve, Persian cooks were freezing sweetened dairy using ice and salt in shallow trays, stirring it by hand until it thickened into something wonderfully decadent. They called it bastani sanati, literally traditional ice cream, though the word bastani came later. Tonight, it's just dessert, and you're just in time. Here's how it works. First, you take milk, sometimes with a bit of cream, if you're fancy, and warm it gently with sugar, rose water, and saffron. Not too hot, just enough to coax the flavors into harmony. Then you pour it into a shallow metal bowl or pan, which you place inside a larger vessel filled with crushed ice and salt. The salt lowers the freezing point of the ice, creating a cold bath intense enough to turn liquid to semi-solid in under an hour. Stirring constantly, usually with a broad wooden spoon, you coax the mixture into thick, golden ribbons. Not quite frozen, not quite liquid. Perfect. Additions vary. Chopped nuts, slivers of orange peel, maybe a dash of mastic gum if you want that chewy texture beloved in Persian sweets. And always a final flourish. More rose water, more saffron, more pistachios. Because moderation is for water and taxes. Once thickened, the dessert is scooped into bowls or wrapped in cloth and buried in the ice for another hour. Not to freeze it solid, but to hold it at that dreamy middle ground. Cool, creamy, and softly sweet. Then it's served, usually after dinner, often outside under the stars. Imagine a long table set in a courtyard. Lanterns flicker. The scent of jasmine floats through the night air. A bowl is placed in your hands, cold, fragrant, glowing with a golden hue. You take a bite. And it's not just the temperature that hits you. It's the balance, the subtlety, no cloying sugar rush, just the soft whisper of saffron, the earthy crunch of nuts, the velvety depth of milk cooled with care. This wasn't peasant fare. It was elite cuisine. But unlike some royal dishes meant only for show, this one had a way of escaping. Over time, versions of it filtered into merchant homes, then towns, then smaller villages. Sometimes made with goat's milk instead of cow. Sometimes served on flatbread, like a chilled wrap. Sometimes eaten in complete silence because you simply didn't want to waste the moment talking. And these desserts weren't limited to saffron and rosewater. Oh no, Persians loved experimenting. They tried sour cherry, mulberry fig, even pomegranate syrups. They mixed in grape must, honey, orange blossom, and powdered dried fruits. One curious tablet mentions a chilled yogurt and herb combination that was either a stroke of genius or someone being banished from the kitchen forever. And when Mongols arrived centuries later, bringing Chinese frozen milk traditions with them, the Persian palate was already primed. The two streams blended like melted sharbat and fresh snow. Over time, those chilled treats became part of what we now know across Central and South Asia as kulfi, bastani, and countless local variations. But at its heart, it was still the same idea. Take something nourishing, cool it until it sings, and serve it to the people you love. Even today in modern Tehran or Isfahan, You can find ice cream shops proudly tracing their lineage back centuries. Some still use hand-churned methods. Others keep the old flavors, saffron, rose, pistachio, but serve them in cones, swirled high like golden peaks of nostalgia. And every bite carries a little hint of that ancient desert breeze. Back in your kitchen tonight, the last of the saffron cream is served. The cooks settle on stools. Someone plays a soft melody on a reed flute, and the stars overhead blink slowly, like they too just tasted something delicious. You lean against the cool clay wall, eyes half closed, and think, if this is what ice can become with a little imagination, what else is possible? The answer, of course, is simple. Everything. You wake early, well before the city stirs, drawn by the soft hush that wraps everything in pre-dawn stillness. It's the hour when cats walk like royalty across rooftops, when vendors mutter dreams instead of prices, and when the air, for once, doesn't bite. You wander barefoot into the cool outer courtyard, your footsteps echoing on damp stone. There, laid out on a low table, is the simplest and perhaps most ancient of desert luxuries. Water chilled from the yakchal, served in a squat clay jug, sweating just slightly in the morning air. It tastes clean, earthy, almost metallic, but mostly it tastes like a small miracle. Today we step away from palaces and prestige and toward daily life, because ice wasn't only for kings and kitchens, it was woven into the routines of ordinary people. Merchants, midwives, stonemasons, and yes, even camel drivers, who all found quiet ways to flirt with coolness in the heat. You make your way to the neighborhood qanat, a modest underground aqueduct system that feels less like plumbing and more like folklore. The entrance is unassuming, a simple slope beneath a brick archway, some dry grasses, a sun-bleached rope. But beneath it lies a network of tunnels, silent, deliberate, enduring. The qanat is genius in motion. Dug at a gentle slope from highland springs or aquifers down to cities and villages, it delivers fresh, cool water using nothing but gravity. No pumps, no pipes, just engineering and patience. The water flows slowly, protected from evaporation and pollution, winding its way beneath fields, neighborhoods, and gardens. And in some places, that water was cold enough to store perishables. You crouch near a side tunnel and spot a woman lowering a basket of yogurt and figs into a qanat chamber, tying it securely to a hook beside the waterline. It's not refrigeration in the modern sense, but it works. Cheese, milk, and even soft fruits could last an extra day or two when nestled in these stone-lipped cubbies. Every bit of coolness was rationed, stretched, made useful. Here's where it gets delightfully specific. Families had designated slots in the qanat walls, like a communal fridge with assigned shelves. It wasn't written down, of course. It was passed through nods and unspoken understandings. The Karimi family gets the third hook on the left. Woe to the child who confused the baskets. In hotter cities like Bam or Kerman, some households even ran their own narrow qanats, microchannels that trickled water through shaded courtyards. The result was a constant ambient chill, enough to keep potted herbs alive and sleeping dogs happy. These channels weren't just functional, they were beautiful. Lined with patterned tiles, bordered by flower beds, they turned water into architecture. You pass one such courtyard now, ducking beneath a trellis heavy with grapevines. A stone path winds beside a thin stream no wider than your hand, its surface glittering like poured glass. A child drops a pomegranate seed into the flow and watches it drift, fascinated. It's part game, part tradition. Of course, historians still debate just how cold qanat water really got. Some argue that any claims of icy water are exaggerated, pointing out that ground temperature rarely drops below 10-15 degrees Fahrenheit in most regions, but others insist that, with enough insulation and depth, some qanats absolutely delivered chilly water, especially at night or in higher altitudes. Whatever the temperature, it was precious, and people used it creatively. Consider Seyhan, the wide, shallow basins found in many Persian homes and gardens. Filled with water, often shaded, they served as evaporative cooling surfaces. Place a jug nearby, or better yet, immerse a clay vessel directly in the basin, and within hours the water inside would be a few degrees cooler than the air outside. Science? Yes, but also tradition, handed down, not handed out. And then there were the storage tricks. Clay pitchers with long necks, covered with wet cloth, hung from ceilings where the breeze could reach them. The principle was simple. As water evaporated from the cloth, it drew heat away from the jug. The result? Cool drinking water with zero electricity. People even wrapped fruit in wet linen and placed it in breezy windowsills. Want cold melon? Just give it a few hours and a little breeze. Want cold butter? Good luck. That one's a little trickier. But perhaps the cleverest of all were the matbach sard, literally cold kitchens. These were special storage rooms, often semi-underground, where perishables were kept on stone shelves. Some were connected directly to kanats or wind catchers. Others simply relied on thick walls, shade, and the occasional ice delivery from a nearby yakshal. It wasn't full refrigeration, but it extended shelf life just enough to make do. And what's most fascinating is how communal it all was. A neighbor might share their cool water supply with others during a heat wave. A block of yakchal ice could be split among 3 families for an afternoon of sweet sharbat. Children took turns fanning sleeping grandparents. Cooling was not just a personal comfort, it was a shared effort. Now imagine this. It's midday. The sun is at its smug, oppressive worst. A young vendor trudges through the alley with a shoulder basket of chilled drinks. Not Coca-Cola or anything with bubbles. Just clay flasks filled with water, cooled overnight near the kanat, and maybe flavored with a sprig of mint or sour lime. People stop him for a sip. He pours carefully, never touching lips to jug, keeping the flow steady like a gentle arc. He charges a few coins, sometimes less. It's hydration with a smile. Hydration as culture. You follow him for a while, the both of you weaving past spice shops and shuttered stalls. The heat rises, yes, but you begin to notice all the small ways the city fights it. Not with brute force, but with elegance. Shutters closed in a certain pattern to block sunlight. Awnings angled just so. Fountains placed where they catch the breeze. Kids napping on the cool stone of the mosque courtyard floor. Everything calculated. Everything inherited. And as you stop beneath a fig tree, shade again, always sacred, you realize something quietly revolutionary. Here in the desert, staying cool wasn't just a comfort. It was an art form. The day softens into late afternoon now. That sleepy in-between when the sun begins to remember it has somewhere else to be. And the city breathes a collective sigh of almost their relief. The air is still heavy, still dry, but there's a subtle shift, like the heat is no longer trying to win, just linger. You follow the winding alleys to the outskirts of town, past homes with their doors open and their walls radiating the warmth of 10,000 previous afternoons. Your destination? The gardens. Persian gardens, bags, are more than patches of green. They are philosophies in plant form, and today you'll discover how these carefully designed paradises became part of Persia's cooling system, both for the body and the soul. You step through a low gate and find yourself in a world turned inward, a rectangle of green framed by whitewashed walls, gravel paths laid out in symmetrical lines, channels of water carving the garden into quadrants, each trickling gently toward a central pool. This isn't just a garden, it's a memory of Eden. The Shahar Bagh layout, literally 4 gardens, is both symbolic and practical. Symbolically, it reflects the 4 rivers of paradise described in ancient texts. Practically, it's engineered to keep things cool. Shade, symmetry, and a lot of water. And here's the first thing you feel, a sudden drop in temperature. The trees, mostly cypress, pomegranate, and date, are placed deliberately, their leaves casting overlapping shadows that ripple as the breeze stirs them. The water channels, fed by kanats or hand-carried jugs, snake through the garden like veins of calm. Evaporation does its work. The air feels 5, maybe 10 degrees cooler. Birds like it here. So do bees. And now, so do you. You take a seat on a raised stone platform beneath a grapevine canopy, the kind of place where one might sip tea and pretend to read poetry while secretly watching ants carry crumbs with inexplicable urgency. These gardens weren't just for show. They were cooling mechanisms embedded in daily life. Homes were often built facing them, with windows that caught the garden breeze and funneled it inward. Some even had channels running from the central pool directly into the home, carrying cool air and scent with it. The ancient Persians believed in harmonizing with the environment, not conquering it. So instead of blasting hot spaces with cold air, they built gardens that gently suggested the idea of coolness. Water, not ice. Shade, not shock. The goal was to remind the body what comfort could feel like, not to overwhelm it with mechanical chill. And this philosophy extended to how time was spent. In the garden, you didn't just sit, you slowed down. You sipped dew, a yogurt drink diluted with chilled water and a sprig of mint. You peeled oranges and let the juice trickle down your arm, unapologetically. You played tacte nard, backgammon, on marble boards. You wrote lines of poetry about how even the breeze here whispered love songs. You didn't need a reason to linger. The garden was the reason. One of the oldest surviving examples is the Finn Garden in Kashan, dating back over 1,000 years, still fed by a spring and cooled by its own aqueduct system. In its prime, it had a central pavilion, open to the breeze, surrounded by trees trained to grow in neat, shady rows. And water, always water, gurgling softly like a lullaby for grown-ups. Historians still argue whether the true origin of Persian garden design came from Mesopotamia, India, or a purely Iranian tradition. But there's no doubt that it became a defining aesthetic. Even Mughal emperors in India modeled their most famous gardens, including parts of the Taj Mahal complex, on Persian prototypes. One fringe theory suggests that some garden layouts were designed not just for beauty or symbolism, but for acoustic cooling. That is, the sound of water, trickling, splashing, echoing in stone channels, trick the brain into perceiving lower temperatures. It's a theory that makes sense the longer you sit here. You feel cooler just hearing the water. Even today, Iranian homes with gardens often refer to the shaded outdoor area as hayat, which also means life. It's a term that blends the physical and the spiritual. Where life happens, where you live. And when life gets too hot, that's where you go to remember how to live again. You watch a gardener now, crouched near a fig tree, loosening soil with a carved wooden tool. His movements are slow but rhythmic, the kind of pace that's earned, not rushed. Every now and then, he splashes a little water on the tree's roots, then on his own neck. You wonder how much of this is about cooling plants and how much is about cooling him. In another corner of the garden, a small boy runs barefoot along the water channel, scattering birds and shouting something about finding the biggest leaf. A woman calls after him, laughing but not truly chasing. There's no need. The garden slows even children. You lie back now on the cool stone bench, arms behind your head, and look up through the vine-laced trellis. The light filters down in patches, gold and green and soft. You can hear a bee somewhere, just one. The world narrows to its essentials: breath, breeze, and a bowl of pomegranate seeds at your elbow. Later, someone might pour cold water over your hands before dinner. Not to clean them necessarily, but to reset them. It's a ritual, like dipping your feet in a stream after walking all day. Not required, just right. And in that moment, you understand why these gardens mattered, why they were copied, exported, cherished. They weren't just solutions to climate. They were answers to discomfort, not with technology, but with thoughtfulness. They said, well, let's not fight the heat, let's design around it. And as the sun dips low, casting long shadows over grapevines and water lilies, you whisper to yourself, cool is not the absence of heat, it's the presence of care. Evening deepens now, that lovely blue hour when walls soften into shadow. Birds settle in fig trees like folded umbrellas, and lanterns begin to glow with that friendly orange sigh. Somewhere in the distance, a flute trades notes with the crickets. The heat, though not entirely gone, begins to lose its grip. You've wandered far today, through domes of ice and towers of wind, kitchens of chilled cream and gardens of careful shade, and now your journey takes you to something quieter still, something bureaucratic, something surprisingly soothing. Welcome to the Ice Ledger. Yes, that's right. Tonight we enter the paper-pushing world of ancient Persian inventory, because for all the glamour of frozen desserts and breezy architecture, none of it worked without record keepers, scribes, clerks, the unsung heroes who made sure the palace didn't run out of ice on a feast day. Imagine the scandal. You step into a government outpost near Persepolis, small, stone-walled, oddly cozy for a tax building. Shelves stacked with clay tablets, walls hung with ink-stained ledgers, quills resting in bowls of walnut ink. There's even a sleepy cat curled beneath the parchment racks, no doubt pretending to be vital to the operation. At the center of the room, a scribe leans over a table, muttering softly as he scratches out an entry. 2 bricks of ice delivered to the house of Darius for the Sharbat of Pomegranates midsummer. He dots the final character and leans back, sighing like someone who just made sure a king won't be mildly inconvenienced. Because yes, ice had to be accounted for, especially when it came from state-funded yakchals or was stored for noble use. It was measured, rationed, and scheduled. And since transporting ice in the desert sun was a logistical ballet, those records became essential. Clay tablets from the Achaemenid era, written in Elamite and Old Persian, contain references to workers in ice storage, deliveries to royal kitchens, and even refreshments for the honored guests of the water temple. Not the juiciest reading, perhaps, but utterly revealing. One mentions a missed delivery due to oxen failure. Another lists losses by melting. There's even a complaint about premature syrup mixing. Bureaucracy, always dramatic in its own dry way. And it wasn't just palaces. Temples used ice too. In Zoroastrian rituals, clean water played a sacred role. It had to be pure, often cool and occasionally chilled with stored ice, especially for midsummer ceremonies where even the priests were melting faster than the candles. One surviving text hints at a snow bowl used in a cleansing rite, though historians still argue whether that was literal snow or a poetic metaphor. Given what we've seen, maybe both. Ice became so important that it eventually factored into taxes and wages. A farmer might owe a portion of winter-stored ice to the local governor. A yakchal keeper might be paid in grain, silver, or, you guessed it, ice privileges for his family, like a chilly little bonus. Congratulations on storing ice. Here's some ice. And then there were the seasonal quotas. Come early spring, before the worst heat descended, government-appointed inspectors would visit ice domes to check the stores. How much ice remained? How clean was it? Were there rats? Yes, rats still existed even in the shadow of empires. Records show that yakshals were often sealed after winter and only reopened with official approval to prevent theft or, more commonly, over-enthusiastic sampling. You can almost hear the conversations. Fareed, did you eat half the block again? No, uncle, it just melted aggressively. And yet, for all its bureaucracy, there was something comforting in it. Ice wasn't mysterious. It was measured, controlled, a product of effort and planning, not just luck. You didn't need to be rich or royal to admire that. You just needed to be hot. Even regular households found ways to mark the cooling season. Some families had their own chalkboards or wall notches to track ice use. How much was left? How many visitors expected? How much could be spared for that special melon dessert? Ice, like time, was budgeted. And when it came time to transport it, there's a story. You follow a caravan now. Just a handful of donkeys, 2 workers, and a carefully wrapped load of ice bricks, bound for a noble house. The sun's just risen, the heat not yet cruel. They've packed the ice in straw and burlap, tied it tight, and hung bells from the donkeys' harnesses. Not for music, but to announce that this cargo should not be delayed. Along the route, villagers nod respectfully. Ice in transit wasn't quite sacred, but it was close. A gift from winter to summer, from night to day. Sometimes deliveries were accompanied by stamped tokens, small clay seals that authorized the release of ice from one storage dome to another. A kind of chilly passport. Lose it, and you might spend the afternoon arguing with an elderly custodian who's not impressed by your sweaty charm. Eventually, some cities developed central ice markets. Open only during summer months, they featured carefully shaded stalls where merchants sold snow chips by weight, often flavored with local syrups. You'd queue up, coins in hand, and walk away with a palm-sized paper cone filled with the day's best chill. Children begged for them. Adults claimed it was just for the kids, and then conveniently forgot to share. Of course, not everyone followed the rules. Some unscrupulous vendors watered down their ice. Others sold snow from unofficial sources, less yakchal, more mountaintop runoff. The authorities tried to regulate it, but really, if you're sweating through your turban, are you going to argue over a few impurities? Probably not. You're going to enjoy that cold bite, impurities and all, and deal with the stomach ache later. As the caravan reaches its destination and begins unpacking, you realize something charming. In ancient Persia, cold wasn't just a comfort. It was an economy, a bureaucracy, a culture. It was planned, debated, recorded, and, above all, shared. And now, as you sit on the shaded porch of a merchant house watching the sun lower itself behind the garden wall, you take one final sip of rosy sharbat, slightly watered down by the last melting ice chip. Still cold. Still magic. The stars are fully out now, scattered across the Persian sky like someone spilled powdered sugar on a deep blue tablecloth. You recline on a woven mat beside a clay lantern, its flame doing a little dance inside the glass. The air is finally cool, not dramatic, just gentle, like someone whispering, there, to the walls. Tonight, we follow the journey of ice beyond its home. Because what good is a frozen brick if it never moves? If it stays hidden under straw and domes, it's just frozen water. But move it, and you unlock delight, medicine, ceremony, even poetry. This is the story of ice in motion. You set out with a group of men walking a moonlit path from the outskirts of the city toward a high plateau village. Each carries a bundle wrapped in woolen burlap. Inside, ice harvested at dusk, packed with care, destined for the next town over. The air smells of dust and fennel and the smoke of distant campfires. One man hums a tune older than anyone present. Moving ice in Persia was an art, timed with near-obsessive care. Travel had to happen at night, when the sun couldn't undo your work. The ice was wrapped in layers, first straw, then cloth, then a dense outer coating of felt. These bundles were secured atop donkeys, camels, or even handcarts, depending on terrain. The rule was simple: keep the breeze, lose the sun. Historians still argue over just how far ice could be transported this way. Some sources claim 30 to 40 kilometers per night. Others scoff and suggest shorter ranges, insisting that most ice stayed local. But oral traditions speak of long ice relays, teams handing off chilled bundles from dome to dome, like some kind of ancient cooling baton race. A frozen relay, not for speed, but for summer joy. You reach a stopover site now, an open courtyard with a low fire, tea boiling, and bowls of flatbread and cucumbers laid out. The travelers unwrap a bundle to check the cargo. Still solid. Maybe a little melt at the corners, but nothing tragic. They nod. One man carves a sliver with a short knife and lets it melt on his tongue like a snowflake made of pride. But the real surprise is what happens when they arrive at the village. People gather like it's a festival. Children whoop down the streets shouting, "Yakamad! Ice is here!" and ran barefoot beside the animals, hoping to snag a chip. Elders leaned on door frames and offered thanks, not just to the travelers, but to the snowmelt spirits, the builders of domes, the workers who'd risen at midnight to pack it all. Ice was a rival. Ice was a gift. The delivery wasn't always just to homes either. Sometimes it was for the bathhouse. Ah yes, the hammam. You follow the carriers into a centuries-old bathhouse where steam lingers thickly in the vaulted air, and the walls sweat like they're alive. And what's being wheeled in? Ice. Not in heaps, but in manageable blocks, destined for the final rinse. Persian bathhouses weren't just about heat. They were about contrast. Hot room, cold room, tepid pool. Ice water was poured into marble basins to shock the system awake after a long soak. It tightened the skin, cleared the head, reminded you that life was worth returning to. One nobleman even wrote that, "No love affair should begin without a cold splash after sweat." You watch a boy fill a copper bowl with freshly chipped ice water and set it near the massage bench. The sound of that water, its glug and splash, echoes like a lullaby for overheated souls. And the reaction on the bather's face when it hits his back? Somewhere between bliss and betrayal, a common expression in summer Persia. But not all ice traveled for baths. Some of it went to apothecaries. Persian medicine was deeply advanced for its time, an elegant blend of Greek theory, Indian spices, and local knowledge of climate and humors. And cold, it had many uses. In summer, doctors prescribed ice chips for fevers, placed on the tongue or melted into water flavored with mint and vinegar. For heat stroke, ice packs wrapped in cloth were applied to the wrists and neck. For melancholy, a chilled rose syrup drink was often given, based on the belief that it could calm the liver and soothe fiery emotions. One curious fringe note from a 12th century physician claims that chilled milk was used to reset dreams, an early poetic understanding of how cooling the body before sleep could lead to deeper rest. You smile, knowing full well how true that feels tonight. And then there were the poets. Yes, of course the poets got involved. This is Persia after all. Ice in their hands became metaphor. Love that melts, desires kept frozen, hearts chilled by absence. Some verses praise the sweet kiss of Sharbat cooled with stolen snow. Others warned against passions hotter than a midday plain, untempered by the wisdom of ice. Even now, a young poet might gift his lover a bowl of iced cherries and call it a sonnet. More reliable than a promise, tastier than a compliment. As you sit on a quiet rooftop watching the final delivery of the night, just one man, just one bundle, you marvel at how ordinary the act seems, yet how exquisite it is. He knocks softly on a wooden door. It opens. A grandmother smiles. He hands her the package with both hands. She bows, he bows. And just like that, summer becomes bearable again. You stretch out on your own rooftop mat, arms behind your head, and think about all the hands that made your current comfort possible. The miners, the carriers, the bathhouse boys, the ledger keepers, the love-struck poets, all working in their own ways to move the cold from one heart to another. The rooftops of the city have become beds tonight. All across the skyline, you see families curled in low bundles, faces turned toward the stars, arms flung over pillows stuffed with dry herbs or worn cotton. Children whisper made-up songs. Grandmothers tell stories without endings. Somewhere, a rooster is very confused and crowing too early. This, it seems, is the quiet triumph of a summer evening in ancient Persia. And as you lie beneath the open sky, letting your eyes trace constellations you'll never quite memorize, the question arises, how did the people sleep in this heat? The answer, as you've come to expect, is a blend of ingenuity, routine, and just a little poetry. You start by rolling up your mat and heading to one of the flat rooftops typical of Persian homes. Low-walled, open, wide enough for several sleepers. These rooftops were more than architectural afterthoughts. They were the kingdom of summer slumber. Each family had a system. First, the mats. Woven reed or soft cotton, often dusted with rose powder or lavender to keep bugs away and dream sweet. Then, the pillows. Nothing too fluffy. Heat loves to hide in fluff. Just firm, comfortable, and ideally sun-dried during the day, so they held the faint warmth of sunlight until cooled by the night. Then came the cooling tricks. Some families soaked their mats slightly in water before laying them out. Just a thin misting, not enough to soak your clothes, but enough to invite evaporation. Others hung damp cloths in the windows or strung them between poles to catch the breeze, creating homemade evaporative coolers. A favorite trick? Placing clay jugs of cool water near your bed. As air passed over them, it dropped in temperature ever so slightly. It wasn't much, but in summer, even a single degree feels like a gift from the gods. And then there were the badgers, wind catchers. You've seen them already. Tall, hollow towers positioned to catch even the faintest breeze and direct it downward into the house. But at night, when temperatures dropped, people used the reverse. Warm air inside the house rose through the tower and escaped, pulling in cooler air from outside. A passive, whispering ventilation system powered only by nature. Historians still argue whether rooftop sleeping was a Persian innovation or a broader Middle Eastern custom, but there's no debate about its effectiveness or its charm. Letters from travelers in the Safavid era describe seeing whole families arranged like human constellations on rooftops, bundled in blankets they didn't yet need, sipping mint tea from thermoses and swatting at the occasional mosquito. And the stars, oh, the stars. City lights hadn't yet smothered the sky, so the heavens spilled out in impossible detail. The Milky Way wasn't a myth, it was the background. And in such a sky, you could believe that frozen water, carried across deserts, might actually be a miracle worth documenting. You settle into your rooftop bed now, pillow fluffed, blanket optional, and take note of what else makes this bearable. The sounds. Crickets. The quiet knock of a door closing 2 alleys over. A woman somewhere humming while she folds laundry under moonlight. The breeze at last unburdened, moves between buildings with a soft sigh. It lifts a corner of your sheet and then rests. Like it too is tired. And still sleep doesn't come immediately. Not because you're uncomfortable, but because you don't want to sleep just yet. You're savoring. You're part of a tradition that stretches back centuries. An entire civilization lying under the stars, cooled not by machines but by wisdom. Let's not forget the nighttime treats. A sleepy uncle might arrive with a tray of chilled melon slices, soaked earlier in Connaught water, dusted with a pinch of salt, or a bowl of yogurt stirred with garlic and mint, eaten with flatbread still warm from the oven. Maybe even a tiny cube of halva, just because. Eating before bed was never required, but if it involved something cold, it became ritual. One account from a 10th century court poet describes how summer nights in Shiraz were blessed with sweet fruits, colder than the gossip of grandmothers, and softer than the silence before dawn. Another traveler praised the iced milk syrup of Yazd, served on rooftops with a spoon carved from sandalwood. Not because it was fancy, just because it was pleasant. And all of this was possible because of systems set in motion long before sunset. The yakchal workers, the sherbet makers, the cooks, the scribes, the carpenters who built the rooftop stairs. Cooling was never accidental, it was orchestrated. In one wealthy home you pass, you notice a servant fanning the master as he sleeps. Not with some exotic feather contraption, but with a folded palm leaf and a rhythm practiced over years. In a modest courtyard nearby, a mother fans her infant using the hem of her shawl. Both fanners, both experts, both devoted. This wasn't about luxury, it was about kindness. And kindness, you realize, is perhaps the greatest coolant of all. Even as the stars begin to tilt westward and the city folds deeper into sleep, one thing remains constant: a quiet dedication to care. People here have always understood that the key to comfort is not escape, but participation. The wind participates, the walls participate, the water participates, and so do you. With that thought, you roll onto your side, the mat cool against your skin, and let the breeze drift across your face like the final, whispered line of a poem you've already forgotten. And finally, you sleep. You wake before dawn, not with a jolt, but with that soft awareness that the sky's about to change color. The rooftops are quiet. The air, cool, miraculous, has not yet remembered to warm up. Even the city seems to hold its breath. You sit up, stretch, and blink toward the horizon, where the first streaks of silver-pink light are beginning to tease the tips of the wind catchers. And so begins the Persian morning ritual, the Great Reset. Because while ice may have cooled the body, the early morning was the true chill of the spirit. You pad downstairs, the stone still cool under your feet. In the courtyard, water has already begun to trickle through the shallow channels between garden beds. A servant is washing the floor with a bucket and a worn cloth, his movements more meditative than mechanical. You follow your nose to the kitchen, where someone is slicing cucumbers into a clay bowl and sprinkling them with vinegar, crushed mint, and, yes, a few leftover slivers of yakchal ice. This apparently is breakfast, but you're not staying for breakfast. You have somewhere unusual to be, a summer mountain encampment. You step onto the caravan trail just as the sun peers over the hills. Your destination lies not in the city, but in the elevated pastures where shepherds graze their flocks and occasionally indulge in a little chilled cream themselves. Here's the thing. Cooling didn't belong only to urban engineers and noble kitchens. The pastoral world had its own quiet cooling hacks, passed from herder to herder, refined over centuries of trial, error, and sunburn. The trail winds upward, dotted with fig trees chirping partridges, and the occasional mule that clearly knows this path better than you ever will. By the time you reach the encampment, tents spread loosely across a shaded plateau. The air has changed. Cooler, thinner, fresher. You breathe deeper without meaning to. A group of nomadic Qashqai herders welcomes you with the kind of understated hospitality that makes you feel instantly like a cousin. They're boiling milk over a low flame, stirring it into a thick, frothy yogurt that they'll later cool in goatskin pouches hung in the shade. One woman shows you how they prepare dew, a yogurt drink diluted with cold spring water, salted and shaken in a goat hide container until it foams. It's a practical beverage, yes, but when chilled in a stream-fed stone basin, it tastes like air wearing mint perfume. They even have a trick for storing dairy, a clay-lined pit half shaded by a boulder and lined with damp straw. It's not a refrigerator, but it works. Cheese stored here can last several days. Milk, maybe 2. Long enough to trade. Long enough to share. And they do share. Children bring over chilled pomegranate slices and a fig leaf folded into a makeshift cup, inside which sits a rough sorbet made from crushed snow, brought down from the mountain ridge at dawn, and sweet mulberries. It's not quite what you'd find in a royal palace, but something about the dirt under your fingernails and the breeze against your cheek makes it the best thing you've tasted in days. Historians still argue whether these rural cooling techniques influenced urban design, or whether it was the other way around. Did the engineers mimic the shepherds' natural storage pits? Or did herders learn from distant whispered stories of palace ice? Maybe it doesn't matter, because here on this quiet plateau, cooling isn't a system, it's instinct. The tents are pitched to catch the wind, angled just so. The cook fire is kept low and far from the sleeping areas. Children nap in cloth hammocks strung between the oldest trees, and nearby, a man tends a tiny garden fed by a spring channel, growing nothing but mint and cress. Just enough for flavor, just enough for cool. You take a moment to lie back on the grass and close your eyes. The ground, surprisingly, holds a trace of cold. You press your palms to it and imagine it traveling up your arms like a memory. There's a story here too, an old one. One shepherd tells you about a legend passed through his family, of a snow spirit who lived in the mountains and gifted cold air to those who respected silence. The spirit didn't like shouting, didn't like rushing. Only those who moved slowly and thanked the breeze would find their way to the hidden spring. The others, they'd sweat forever. Is it true? Probably not. But then again, you are sitting in cold grass, sipping mint dew, while the world below bakes. So maybe the snow spirit nodded at you today. You stay with the herders until dusk, watching the goats graze. The children chase dragonflies and the women fold mats scented with herbs. Then it's time to head back, down the hill, through the fig groves, into the golden hush of evening. By the time you return to the city, the sun has dipped low, casting long shadows across the domes and courtyards. The heat has lost its bite. Someone offers you a bowl of cold noodles, flavored with yogurt and garlic, and you eat it slowly, savoring the contrast between the day's climb and the night's descent. Cooling, you realize, isn't always about ice. Sometimes it's a mountain breeze, a shaded spring, a fig leaf full of mulberries eaten on a hill with people who know your name by dinner time. It's the deep, quiet breath that comes not from machines, but from the land itself. The city is drowsy again. That familiar hum, rooftop whispers, garden frogs, a merchant's sandal thudding gently against stone, returns like a lullaby you forgot you knew. Lamps flicker behind lattice windows. A woman waters basil with a steady hand. A boy chases his shadow down an alley. You return home, feet dusty, heart light. But you're not done. Tonight we explore one final corner of Persian cooling culture, the Sharbat houses. Yes, before cafes, before boba tea shops, before ice this and cold brew that, there were Sharbat khane, little establishments tucked between spice markets and mosques where you could sip your way through the heat in style. Sharbat, from the Arabic sharba, meaning a drink, was Persia's love letter to refreshment, a blended beverage of water, fruit or flower syrup, herbs, sometimes a bit of vinegar or salt for balance, and always, always best when chilled. And in the golden age of Persian cities, Sharbat wasn't just a beverage. It was a ritual, a performance, a local art form. You walk into one such house now, its front open to the street, shaded by cloth awnings and draped with flowering vines. The air smells of rose, lemon, basil, and cold clay. Inside, low tables made from reclaimed wood surround a central fountain. A cat snoozes beside it, clearly unimpressed by your arrival. A server approaches with a tray, 5 glass bottles, each filled with a different colored liquid: emerald green, ruby red, gold, indigo, cloudy white. You pick one at random and pour. The scent is immediately calming: rose and cardamom, maybe a whisper of saffron. You add ice, shaved from a block, not crushed, and watch as the syrup twists through the cold water like silk. And when you sip, it's like drinking a garden. Sharbat houses were equal parts apothecary, cafe, and neighborhood confessional. Poets gathered here to lament the heat, lovers met to pass secret glances, and old men debated the best mint-to-lemon ratio like it was foreign policy. Recipes varied by region and season. In Yazd, you might find a cucumber and mint blend served with a pinch of salt. In Shiraz, violet syrup was all the rage. Floral, faintly bitter, perfect with shaved ice and a side of gossip. In Isfahan, they favored sour cherry with sugar and a sprig of tarragon. Even the nomads brought their versions. Fermented goat's milk with crushed berries, sharper on the tongue but just as beloved. Historians still argue whether the addition of vinegar in some sharbat recipes was a medical choice, a culinary preference, or just an acquired taste. One 11th century text describes vinegared sugar water cooled by night air to prevent swelling of the spleen. Another calls it a taste that separates men from boys. But the real genius lay in the serving method. Drinks were often presented in tall, narrow glasses stored inside ceramic basins, kept cool by Qanat water. The server would dunk the glass in a basin of near-freezing water before filling it, so even the glass itself was cold to the touch. And if you were lucky, or just especially sweaty, you got the snow crown. A spoonful of freshly scraped ice floated on top, sometimes shaped into a delicate little mound like a miniature snowy mountain. You sit now with your glass resting against your cheek, absorbing the chill like a lizard who's finally found the right rock. Around you, people lean into conversation. A young man plucks at a cedar in the corner, the notes rising like mist over a hot pool. A server refills glasses with theatrical flourish, always with a knowing wink. You notice a small chalkboard behind the counter with the day's specials. Lime and basil sharbat, cooling, sharp, bright. Tamarind and honey, sour sweet, mood-altering. Cucumber and rosewater, for dreams that don't argue. No one rushes. Sharbat drinking is about pace, savoring, allowing the tongue to remember textures you didn't know water could have. Ice isn't just about temperature, it's about texture, sound, contrast. You clink your glass lightly, enjoying the tiny tap of cold glass meeting stone. That sound alone could calm a headache. Some sharbat houses were known to add a tiny pinch of ground poppy seeds, not for intoxication, but to anchor thoughts, as one poet put it. Others floated petals atop their drinks, marigold for brightness, lavender for peace. One even painted tiny poems inside the glass, revealed only as you drank. And here's a fringe tidbit. During certain festivals, elite sharbat houses served drinks layered like sand art, syrups of different densities carefully poured so that the drink formed stripes, pomegranate red, then lime green, then violet, then gold. A little show, a little science. You lean back now, a little sugar buzzed, a little too comfortable, and watch as the server brings out a dish of chilled watermelon. It's cut into neat triangles, dusted with ground pistachio and sea salt. You take a bite. Somehow it tastes like the color green was just invented. Outside, a donkey clops by with bells on its saddle. A woman laughs at something you'll never hear. The fountain keeps burbling in its rhythm, forever cooling, never in a rush. And you realize something gentle but deep. This isn't just hydration, it's attention. Someone grew those herbs, someone boiled that syrup, someone chipped that ice, someone poured it for you, hoping you'd take your time. And so you do. You take your time. Yes, believe it or not, the ancient Persians cooled not only their drinks and dwellings, but their documents. Welcome to a tiny, windowless building near the palace complex, the Royal Archive. Thick stone walls, sunken floors, and clay jars sealed with wax. Not for preservation by magic, but by temperature. You step inside and it's instantly cooler. No fans, no breeze, just architecture. The ceiling curves gently, guiding heat upward. The floors are lined with water-soaked reed mats. And down here in the most precious section, clay tablets and scrolls are stored alongside small blocks of ice harvested from the royal Yakshal just hours ago. Why? Because ink melts, wax smudges, and secrets don't like heat. This room smells of dust and rosewater, and a little bit of ambition. A scribe crouches in the corner, working by oil lamp. He's copying a decree about ice taxes, of course he is, onto a fresh scroll. When he's done, he'll place it into a lacquered box, which will go into a clay jar, which will be sealed and stored until someone far in the future wonders how the Persians managed all this. There are whispers in history about a cool chamber of dreams, a royal project rumored to store not only scrolls but maps, love letters, and, yes, recipes, including the original instructions for making pomegranate sherbet with snow from Mount Damavand. Historians still argue whether this archive truly existed, or whether it's just a romantic tale passed down by scribes who wish their jobs were slightly more thrilling. But the idea persists. Somewhere out there, a forgotten jar might still hold the last summer of a long-dead king, recorded in ink cooled by mountain ice. You leave the archive quietly, pulling the heavy curtain closed behind you. The night presses in, soft and deep. You're barely a dozen steps from your door now. Lanterns have been blown out one by one, and the wind has slowed to something gentler than breath. Inside, your sleeping mat awaits. The clay jug by your pillow sweats faintly with condensation. You touch it. It's still cool, still holding the day's last chill. You settle into the mat, adjust your blanket, and let the stillness wrap itself around you. Outside, a wind catcher hums like a flute with no hands. The stars blink, steady and slow. Somewhere, someone is sipping their last mouthful of sherbet. Somewhere else, a child is dreaming of snow in a bowl. And then, you're weightless. You're in a courtyard again, scent of saffron in the air, holding a chipped bowl of sorbet so cold you can feel it in your ears. A dog is napping in the shade. A priest walks by, humming a hymn. The yak chal looms in the distance, aglow in moonlight like some gentle spaceship that crash-landed just to cool your lemonade. Time dissolves, like ice in tea. You're not just asleep. You're resting, deep in the heart of a civilization that built refrigeration out of geometry, imagination, and the tireless desire to be just a little more comfortable. And now, let's soften our pace. You've come so far tonight, through sun-scorched plains and marble bathhouses, past rose-scented sherbet stalls and whispering wind catchers. You've walked the cool corridors of palace archives, stood beneath the shadows of ancient ice domes, and tasted snow that fell long before your time. Let your breath slow now, in and out. No need to think about how this worked or how clever the engineering was. Just imagine it, cold water trickling in a narrow channel, the clink of ice against clay, the soft laughter of someone sipping something sweet beside you. Feel the weight of your body easing into the mat, each limb releasing the day. Your hands unclench, your jaw softens. Behind your eyelids, faint stars flicker, just like the ones above Persia tonight. Maybe you're still on that rooftop. Maybe a breeze is nudging the edge of your blanket. Maybe you can hear a melon being sliced 2 doors down. Wherever you are, you're safe now, wrapped in quiet, held by stone and sky. The heat can't touch you here. The day has done all it needed to do. And tomorrow? Tomorrow will come gently, like a sunrise filtered through jasmine vines, like mint crushed into syrup, like the first drop of snow melting into sherbet. But for now, there's only stillness. Let it carry you. Let it cool you. Let it keep you. Sleep well, traveler.